Welcome to Mind Over Splatter, a podcast about horror movies. My name's Dylan Ferguson, and I'm enjoying a Dunham beer, a West Coast IPA aged in white wine barrels. And we've got the Dream Team back together.
Dream Team. Perfect.
How's it going, Sheldon?
So I got my usual. I got some Bush, but I also got a little variety pack of tall boys. I got a white chocolate stout from Spectrum, a Rockstar vodka, and a melon haze pale ale.
All right, I've got some variety.
We'll see if I get through them all.
I'm going to put my money on yes.
Me too.
Yeah, it's a good place to put your chips, yeah.
Will, how are you?
Not too shabby. Not doing the beer right now. Just going with the JP Weisers.
Oh, nice. Keeping it classy.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to get back into some proper horror here, some capital H horror.
Thank God.
So today what we're going to be focusing on is horror anthology films. Just in case for anybody listening that term doesn't mean anything to you, by horror anthology films, we mean what's also called compendium films or omnibus films. That is a feature-length movie that's made up of several smaller movies, several episodes or vignettes. Obviously, in horror movies, there's a long tradition of that, spanning decades and different countries. And we're all going to be going into some of our favorite ones here tonight. We've each picked 3 of our favorite horror anthology films that we're going to get to one by one. I'm pretty excited for this one.
Me too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a much better mood than I was last podcast we did. A much better mood.
Thank fucking God.
That was all your fault, the last one, so.
I know. All right, so let's get started here. Do you guys mind if I go first?
Give her.
Not at all. Go for it.
This wasn't intentional, but I realized none of the 3 movies I picked are American movies. For the first one, let's start out in East Asia. I'm going to be talking about 3 Extremes from 2004.
Okay.
It was a follow-up to a movie called 3, which was also a horror anthology. 3 Extremes was the better one. It had bigger name directors. So there was a lot of great horror movies being made in East Asia in the first decade of the 21st century all over. I remember really being into those movies too around the time this came out. You know, when I was like 18, 19, I was always going to the Asian video store and getting the latest horror movies coming out of Hong Kong and South Korea and Thailand and Taiwan and Japan, of course, where there's always been amazing horror movies every decade. So 3 Extremes picked 3 really good directors representing 3 different countries and asked them each to make a short horror film. So there's one from Hong Kong, one from Korea, and then one from Japan.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a cool concept. And especially when it came out, I was really stoked when this came out too, because I love these filmmakers, and it was really felt like there was just this great creative peak of East Asian horror movies at that time. So the first part here is called Dumplings, and it's a movie by Fruit Chan, who's a Hong Kong filmmaker, best known for Made in Hong Kong and Durian Durian. So Dumplings is, I'll just cut to the chase. It's a movie about eating fetuses.
Oh.
Specifically fetuses that have been chopped up and made into dumplings. So the story is about a woman named Mrs. Lee, who used to be an actress, played by Miriam Young, who's worried about aging. So she consults a mysterious character known as Aunt May, played by Bai Ling. It's a fucking awesome performance by Bai Ling, who in her apartment complex produces dumplings made from aborted fetuses that have rejuvenating properties, allegedly.
Like a play on like when they eat like shark fins and shit.
Kind of, yeah. I think there's definitely a bit of a satire or critique of Chinese traditional medicine in this movie.
I see.
I'm not really super well qualified to speak about or to diagnose exactly what elements of satire or critique of Chinese society are going on in this movie, but I think there's definitely commentary on Chinese traditional medicine cures. It's really fucking creepy. And in a movie that, you know, over the 3 episodes, there are some moments that are, like the title implies, kind of extreme. It's pretty cool that maybe the scariest moments in any of these 3 shorts are just shots of a woman just sitting at a table and eating dumplings and just hearing a little bit of crunch on the soundtrack. And that's just enough for it to be, like, chilling.
Are we allowed to spoil it? I've never seen it, so I'm curious what happens.
I think we should avoid spoilers.
Oh. Did you get younger? Did it work?
It works. That's not a spoiler.
Okay, I need to start making...
It seems to work anyways. Unless the rejuvenation was inside her all along.
We'll have to try. Okay.
It's worth a shot. And in the movie, the closer to being birthed the fetus was, the more powerful its rejuvenating powers are. So, as you can imagine, it starts to get a little more gruesome as it goes along, as she tries to find stronger cures. There's probably some commentary going on elements of Chinese society, like traditional medicine. Also, there's a lot of shots about the housing complexes where they live, which look a little chilly and nightmarish. I can't really comment on that, but it's an interesting web of associations that's kind of a backdrop to what sort of feels like a Brothers Grimm fable. It's possibly an anti-abortion movie. Hard to say. I'm not down with anti-abortion stuff, but it's worth pointing out that I'm not too clear that's what's happening. And also, anti-abortion stuff in China has a different set of connotations than it does in the West, since it's usually historically been associated with specifically aborting women to try to have a male child under the one-child policy. So it's not totally the same as being anti-abortion here. Not sure it's an anti-abortion movie, but that's a clear possible interpretation that comes up. It's really well shot. It's really fucking creepy. The sound design is great and definitely unsettling. So after Dumplings, we move on to a second film, which is Cut. This is from South Korea, directed by the great Chan-wook Park, a filmmaker I love. Chan-wook Park, one of the big luminaries of Korean New Wave, most famous as the director of Old Boy, The Handmaiden. So this is kind of a zany one, the most comic one. It's a set piece. It takes almost entirely within one set. So it stars a director who's been kidnapped by somebody who was an extra in his movies and has also kidnapped his wife. And there's just a series of weird and gruesome gags that ensue. There's all these great moments of tonal awkwardness where the person who's kidnapped the director just breaks out into a dance scene and stuff. Just strange shit's going on.
Well, isn't he also doing like he does like his own little montage of the different characters he's played to try and refresh his memory, and he just shows up in all various costumes?
Yeah, he acts like totally upset that the director doesn't recognize him, but obviously prepared for this too, because he has every costume he wore as an extra in every one of his movies. And yeah, I love the weird tone of all Korean New Wave movies, but especially Chan-wook Park's movies.
So was this like more of a funnier episode?
It's definitely the most comic one. The other two don't really have much comedy at all. The way it's shot is really zany too, just the camera's just roving all over the place in tons of creative shots. I wouldn't call it like one of Chan-wook Park's best films, but it's still really good and fucking weird. So then we move on to the third one and final one, which is from Japan. This one is by Takashi Miike. So Miike is known for his especially violent and gruesome and unsettling movies. That's not all he does, of course. This dude's made a fucking zillion movies in all kinds of genres. But
he's insanely prolific.
Insanely, yeah. If you look at his filmography, there'll be years where he's made like 7 movies. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But because he's most known for his intense, gruesome horror movies like Audition.
Oh, I've seen that one. Okay.
Yeah, that's one of his best,
okay.
Maybe his best. I can't say what's his absolute best because I have not seen every 600 of the movies he's made.
Yeah, his most famous is probably Ichi the Killer.
Yeah, maybe
I've seen that
Dead
one
or
too.
Alive, perhaps.
That's probably that in Audition, or probably because they had such a Western following too.
Or more recently, Harakiri, who had got a lot of festival love. And so this one is not one of his most gruesome or violent movies. It's not that difficult to digest. It does have a huge tonal shock moving from Chan-wook Park's Cut to Takashi Miike's episode, which is called The Box. But the tonal shock is because Miike films this one with very still, austere beauty, really. It's really shot really in a lovely way, kind of poetically. A lot of like still cameras, long shots, lingering on snow and peeling wallpaper and things like that. It's really lovely the way he shot it, and it has a very meditative tone to it. This is kind of a fairy tale. So it's about a writer who's kind of a recluse, a troubled writer known as Kyoko, who is haunted by memories of her past when she and her twin sister were part of a circus act in what was apparently like just the most grim, depressing circus in the world. And the circus master kind of had a hold on both of them. and something horrible happened in her past, and then her present and her past start to blur together. She's haunted by nightmares. It's hard to tell what's real and what isn't. People who've seen a lot of Miike movies know he's very mistrustful of things like family ties. I think family is really a big source of horror for Miike. So the circus was kind of an awful family unit, which is very much in his themes. And just mistrusting everybody's motives all the time. Miike is a huge misanthrope. He's got to be one of cinema's greatest misanthropes. He could maybe fight it out with Lars von Trier for the title. And this movie doesn't pull any punches in terms of abuse and trauma, but it's not a big, violent, gruesome movie. It is an extremely haunting and chilling movie. It has a really cool twist at the end. Love the twist, and a great way to end it.
Yeah, I haven't seen this one yet, so I will have to check it out.
It's a pretty good example, a nice little sampler platter of how they really can maintain that sort of art house aesthetic and vibe, but just pushing things to the, like, not to overuse the phrase extreme, but it pushes your reactions to the extreme, what you could possibly enter into the prose as extreme. It's not so much the visuals, like the gags, the blood, things like that. It's like the repercussions, like the weird twists in the middle one, the Korean one. You know, the identity of people comes into question and plays a huge part into the tragedy of it. The loss of identity, the mistaken identities become such an important part. And, you know, the last part, Box, has a bit of that too. Like, you not knowing, like, trying to know who you are is a big part, and trying to know the people around you, and just, yeah, the distrust of not knowing and doing horrible things out of that confusion and misguidedness, or having horrible things done to you out of that.
Even in Dumplings, there's a bit of that. She's trying to connect with, the main character's trying to connect with an older version of herself, because she feels like she's not herself anymore now that she's starting to age a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that is kind of a common thread that she's...
That's very true. If you really think about it, each person, like, the strongest things that happen to them in each story comes from a lack of awareness of their own identity and who they're with.
While we're doing this, it's probably a good idea to mention which particular vignette we think is our favorite and the movies we're talking about. And let's say, going into Three Extremes, I actually thought Dumplings was my favorite because I really remember that a lot. Mm-hmm. Oh, I should mention that there is a full-length version of Dumplings too. It's the only one of these three that was also released as a standalone film, edited to a longer length.
Wow.
I have seen the full-length version of Dumplings. I don't really remember that much different about it, which might be a sign that you don't necessarily need to see the longer version.
I can't think of... I was going to say, I can't think of any other short story in these anthologies that made a full-length movie out of. Some of them should have, but I've never...
It's a rare thing to have happen.
Yeah, I mean, the only other one I could think of really is Death Proof from Grindhouse.
Oh, right.
But yeah, I expected Dumplings to be my favorite, but revisiting it, I was really, really impressed with The Box by Takashi Miike, and I think that's actually my favorite one. Do you want to go next, Sheldon?
So, before I mention what my first one is, I was going to talk about, like, what an anthology horror movie to me should consist of.
Nice.
And it, like, for me, it needs to have, like, a mix of horror and comedy. It needs them both.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, like,
it's part of the tradition.
Yeah, like these the VHS ones, I think, was just like scary, and with no break. You know what I mean? Like, there's no pacing. I love the fact that all the ones I have listed have, like, some fun, like, creative link to each story. Not like movie blank screen, movie blank screen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to start with Creepshow from 1982, which consisted of basically everything I just said. So when I first saw this, I think I was like 13, maybe 14, and I assumed it was the first of its kind and there was no others. You know, so like confused by it, I guess. So I expected like a full movie when I rented it from the video network. And in these times, we didn't have fucking IMDb or Google to, type in horror anthology and then have a list of all of them. I thought it was like this brand new thing. So I think that's why in my head, every anthology should have this same, like, format.
I'm definitely willing to accept it as like a gold standard.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. Yeah, so Creepshow This one had 5 stories, which seems like quite a bit, and an intro and an outro. This was George Romero and the king of horror himself, Stephen King, created this movie. It had a fun comic book theme. From what I read, it had like a homage to like the horror comics from the 50s.
Yeah, like EC Comics.
Yeah, so the intro was the little boy, which was Stephen King's son, reading one of these comics called Creepshow. And then the father, who was Tom Atkins from other awesome horror movies such as Maniac Cop, Night of the Creeps, Halloween 3, to name a few. Which is weird, because he was uncredited, I just noticed, watching this again. Anyways, that pissed me off. But the father is Tom Atkins. He goes into the room, gets angry at the kid for reading like these shitty comic books and throws it in the garbage. And this was what starts it off with the first episode, which is called Father's Day. Written by Stephen King, stars Ed Harris. So it starts off with a house party, and they're waiting for their sister to arrive, who is rumored to have killed their father. And this is just a zombie short, which is what you would assume would happen with a George Romero movie. The next one, which is
The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill.
So this one, I'll say right now, is my favorite one before I get into any of the other ones, because for one, I have a huge Stephen King boner, and it stars Stephen King. I know you guys really don't like Stephen King as much as me, because I asked earlier.
I dig him.
Okay, well, you said you're flaccid. I'm pretty sure that was the word you used.
That was not the word I used.
That was the word I used.
Oh, that was Dylan. Okay.
That was Dylan. Yeah.
He's not a terrible actor. I'll give him that. I have a half chub after watching him perform as his comic character.
Yeah, so he plays this like weird fucking goofy over-the-top character who sees a meteor crash in his yard, and this crater ends up being the death of him through the alien life form that it was in it. And then story 3, Something to Tide You Over. This one is another... Fuck, maybe this is my favorite one. This is another... They're all so good. This is another zombie movie, I guess. This one stars Leslie Nielsen from Naked Gun and so forth, and Ted Danson. The Ted Danson. I guess Leslie Nielsen's character is trying to get revenge on Ted Danson for sleeping with his wife. I guess captures the wife, captures the husband, and buries them on the beach up to their neck, where there's a tide coming in and out. The previous one is like this weird, goofy, funny little short, and this one seems a little bit more serious until the end, which is kind of funny because it's Leslie Nielsen. Leslie Nielsen has one big line at the end of the movie, and it's fucking awesome.
It's a really fantastic final line, yeah.
And the next one, we got The Crate, which is
also your favorite.
This one is not my favorite. It's between the Stephen King one and Something to Tide You Over. This is a creature feature, basically. There's a crate, obviously, found by, I think, the housekeeper or the janitors. And it's labeled Antarctica 1945 something. They eventually break into this crate and we find out what's in it, which seems to be some sort of Yeti monster. I don't think they really said. This one, he used all practical effects, and it did look better than any monster from those 90s movies we just saw.
It probably looks better than the Grey Gorillas from Congo, to be fair. Yeah.
It did. It looked pretty good. I don't know the actor's name in this. I don't know any of the actors in this one, actually, but the main actor plays this pathetic, like...
That's Hal Holbrook, who actually, he just passed away exactly 1 month ago today.
Oh, okay.
He was most famous for, he did a Mark Twain one-man show that was acclaimed. He was also, in All the President's Men, he was Deep Throat.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
And the wife was Adrienne Barbeau.
And then we'll move on to the last one. This one is called They're Creeping Up on You. Probably my least favorite one. This was insect horror about some germaphobe living in this little apartment. He starts having a roach infestation. There's nothing else to say about that one. I just didn't enjoy that one that much. And the actor is E.G. Marshall.
Yes, he's kind of playing like Howard Hughes, I feel.
Yeah.
The tabloid story of Howard Hughes locked away in his compound, being a total germaphobe, and then the character's an absolute piece of shit, right? He's a total asshole, so he kind of gets his comeuppance by having this cockroach infestation. I like that one myself.
Oh, really? Okay.
I do. That's the one that I keep forgetting about, because it's right at the tail end. It's up against stiff competition. It's tough.
Oh, I disagree. That's my favorite, actually.
No,
Going back to Father's Day, Ed Harris had a weird dance that almost overcame the
Oh, yeah.
The weird dance scene from Friday the 13th Floor with Crispin Glover.
Yeah, that's true.
So with all these movies, every intense scene was shot with some weird blue, red neon lighting, but it just made the movie so much more fun.
Even when they would get to moments of genuine terror, they would purposely bring it back to camp in its own way to kind of keep that EC Comics 1950s, like a kid reading the comic book would see stuff like this. And those comics definitely I've read a good number of them, and some of them are quite unsettling, and they got away with a lot before there was
until they didn't.
Well, because then the comics code came in, and then
and
then they just had to stop them altogether. It just shows how far they were going. I liked how it would bring it into bits of that campy visuals. Like the crate is such a visceral, disturbing monster, and it's like eating people's faces, and then all of a sudden you get the stark colors of the 60s Batman show. It's like, I forgot we're having fun. Yes.
So what is your favorite, Dylan, in this one?
It's the last one.
Oh fuck yeah! You already said that.
I don't know. It's weird. It's fun. I like the weird old billionaire creep getting his comeuppance. Great performances by some of the cockroaches. Shout out to, there's a few of them in particular that I just wanted to mention by name. No, never mind. But there's a lot of cockroaches, a ton of them. I don't know, how do they wrangle those cockroaches? Like, how do they get them back in the box after they release
I think
them?
just kill them all, right? They're all in this one room together. They probably just send in that smoke.
For the last bit where they're like stepping on a bunch, and for the wide shots especially, Tom Savini used nuts and raisins for a big part of it. So
right, but there's still clearly a ton of real
there definitely
ones as
is.
well.
Yeah, no, they got someone from like the Natural History Museum to provide.
Yeah, it's a good thing that when they have those things at the end of the movie, like no animals were harmed in this, that does not apply to insects, because there's no way they did not harm any of the insects. And also, my thought is, how do you get them back into a box afterwards? Somebody has to run around and catch them. Like,
they're cockroaches.
They're notorious for being impossible to catch.
With hope and a bunch of brooms.
Also, of course, the graphics of this movie, the animation, right? Keeps it in the comic book vibe. Between episodes, we switch from the comic panels, and you have these little animated moments that replicate the look of comic books, which is such a loving tribute. That kind of occasionally comedic, often gruesome storylines.
Yeah, it's pretty creative.
It gives it its own character.
Yeah, that's Creepshow.
Well, I guess on to me then.
Yeah. Give us some.
I guess just because of that choice, I'm going to change my order a little bit here, and I feel like I have to go right into one of my favorites, along with Creepshow, Tales from the Darkside, the movie. It was based on the television series of the same name, superior to the show in many ways, and I say that this one should follow it up because it's been said by Tom Savini and others that this was spiritually Creepshow 3. Because Creepshow 3 was originally scrapped before it was revived as an inferior sequel, but at the time, this one has more of the proper follow-up to it because it is a team effort of Romero and Stephen King. Not through and through, it's not quite as much like the first Creepshow where the two of them did everything virtually. This one has some stuff written by Michael McDowell, but George Romero still contributes a screenplay that was adapted from a Stephen King story. So the two of them got their paws on this as well. It's 1990, as many of the better ones have. It has an anchoring story that stars Debbie Harry as a witch. We only know she is a witch simply because she says so and is planning to eat a child. And I love that the way that this one is told is through her being stalled. Like, this kid tells her stories. Each of these stories is the way of stalling her, which...
So the kid's kind of like Scheherazade in 1001 Days.
Yeah, and with quite the... I think he is reading from a book. Yeah, he has a book that he's reading from. It'd be great if it was off the top of his head, because after a while, even the witch would be like, Jesus, kid, like, what is happening with you? It's just the whole film is packed with so many goodies and a lot of great cast. The first one has the most familiar actors in it. It's actually an adaptation of a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle story from the 1800s. It's called Lot 249, where a graduate student played by the infallible Steve Buscemi. And
no way.
in the film, he seems to be the most fortunate, despite him being like kind of bullied. He seems to be the most fortunate graduate student I have ever encountered, because he has all these amazing relics, including a mummy, and all these things that he has at his disposal, like just this, like the kind of library that you only see in Victorian depictions of cinematic treasures. It's just very, it's well beyond anything I remember from school. Yeah, there's some classmates that are using him. He's like the bookish nerd, one of which is played by a young Julianne Moore. He gets like framed for something. He then uses his newfound mummy that he has at his disposal. I wish Sir Arthur was still around so I could kind of question him about what was his thought process there of giving a grad student a mummy. But it makes for a nice short story where he sets the mummy upon them, as well as Julianne Moore's brother, played by Christian Slater. So again, we're just teeming with early 90s actor goodness. It's got a slight waft of the Universal horror films with the mummy inclusion, and the way the pacing goes through it. It has a bit of that air. It's sticking with being kind of classically spooky. And then we have one of my all-time favorites, partly because of my own bias towards felines, but we have Cat from Hell, which is George A. Romero. This is the one that he wrote, adapted by a short story by Stephen King, which, if I ever get to personally thank Stephen King for any of his stories, it's probably this one. Cat from Hell.
Like, your dick's getting a little bit hard talking about this, eh?
I guess if that's the only way you can appreciate things, then sure.
If that's the only frame of reference,
then fine. In that case, then my desk is lifted a foot off the ground. It's Cat from Hell, an amazing story. It's one of those concepts that the second you hear the pitch, how can you not say yes, where a professional hitman, has been hired to assassinate a cat by this eccentric, wealthy, wheelchair-bound, old money person, and he explains that the reason that he wants this cat killed is because the cat has been slowly picking off everybody in the household, and they have no way of possibly trying to catch it or kill it. They are unsuccessful. It's something otherworldly, perhaps, and he offers him $100,000 to do so, and then the adventure goes from there. And in this story, I won't say where in the story comes up, but definitely the nastiest kill occurs in it, like graphically, but it's also the most hilarious.
I love how at some point the hitman, he pulls out his little briefcase of weapons to use, and he chooses at first some sort of poison, so there wouldn't be any idea of who killed it. It's like, it's a fucking cat. We're killing a cat. Why are you trying to poison it?
Yeah, it's
fucking shit.
Yeah, it's a remote location. He could take a flamethrower out. I don't think the guy...
Start with the fucking big gun.
Yeah.
It's a cat.
Although,
oh god,
as we know, that might not be good enough. So there's that one. It's magical. That one should be a feature length. It should be a trilogy. It should be a whole series. It's just everyone trying to get rid of. It's like the cat came back, but with gore. It's fantastic. And then we have the next story is the one that really haunted me as a kid when I first came across it. And that's The Lover's Vow. It's an adaptation of a bit of Japanese folklore. There's specifically a translation done in 1904 that kind of played on this, strange spiritual, man and animal and nature combining and everything. But it's a fantastic story. James Remar is a struggling artist. He's having a kind of a night on the town with a buddy, encounters this gigantic monster who kills his friend and then makes him promise that he never tells anybody what he saw. And then with that, we just sort of follow his going about his life, where he meets somebody, is kind of getting his life together, but he always has this trauma of seeing this thing, and he can't tell anybody. And it's driving his art. It's given him a sort of a new lease on life, and yet it's also this millstone around his neck of something that he wants to unburden himself with. But it makes for a very interesting story. Commando's Ray Don Chong shows up as his père amour, has a very good EC comic type vibe of where the story goes, like the type of macabre ending it has, and and just the whole way that, like, the way he's tortured throughout it. It has kind of that almost like Edgar Allan Poe style tortured protagonist who's got this darkness inside them, like this secret and something that they just want to reveal, even though it would mean collapsing everything they've built. And the monster just was what certain monsters really freaked me out as a kid, and that gargoyle, just the way that its eyes moved and the way it was lit really struck me. On reviewing, like, it's, you know, it's good, but it's not too far from stuff you see in like Guyver or whatever, but it's at the time quite effective. And then the whole film wraps up with returning to Debbie Harry, who's just been listening to all these stories, which I think is a nice little afternoon.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
And that's Tales from the Darkside. Watch it every October. It's super, kids.
So this was the first time I've ever watched this.
Nice.
Like a couple weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
Like, how have I gone through my entire life and have never seen this? I own the TV series on DVD.
Oh, wow.
They're terrible. It's a terrible show.
Yeah, it's not a very good show.
And then I watched this, and this movie is so fucking good. Each little episode is good. Yeah, I think I like the Lover's Lane one the best. Lover's Vow, sorry.
Yeah.
That was my favorite one.
I can see that being like...
I just like it was a fun creature feature.
It's such a well-crafted story.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm up. The next movie I wanted to bring up, Dead of Night. So we're going back a little ways here. We're going back to 1945.
The OG.
Mm-hmm.
The OG, not the first horror anthology. There are silent German horror anthology films, but definitely potentially a foundational one, I guess. This maybe was a point of reference for some other later films. So 1945, Dead of Night is a British movie. This one has a framing device. It has a through line, so they are connected, like the last couple movies we've been talking about. The different segments were directed by different people in this one. So the directors include Alberto Cavalcanti, who is a Brazilian, Charles Crichton, who had a long career directing comedy films. He's maybe best remembered as the director of A Fish Called Wanda,
nice.
A mere 45 years later.
Wow.
Also, Robert Hamer and Basil Dearden were the other two English directors of this one. The way it starts is that we have this guy, an architect named Walter Craig, played by Mervyn Johns, who shows up in somebody's country house. There's a sort of a dinner party atmosphere. A group of guests are gathered around, having drinks in the foyer. And Walter Craig is out of sorts because this scene that he walked into feels like it is his dream, that this is a recurring dream, a recurring nightmare that he's been having. So he says this to his guests with bafflement, that he feels as if he's walked into this dream of his. And they're all quite interested in this. And the one person who's skeptical is a psychologist who, as a movie psychologist, it has a German accent and thick glasses. And other people at the sort of dinner party try to back him up by telling you about times that they also have felt that they've experienced something paranormal, something unusual in their lives. So that's the setup for having a series of different stories. There are 5 different episodes in this, not counting the framing device that we cut back to every time a story ends. The different episodes are, we start off with one which is a bit of a quickie about a race car driver who has a premonition about his upcoming death. That pretty quick and basic short horror story. And then we get to another one where a young woman recalls a time that she was playing a sort of hide and seek at a party, and she encountered a mysterious young man. The next one gets a little bit more interesting. It involves a haunted mirror that a couple brings into their house. A mirror that seems to be haunted with a memory of its previous owner, who is an extremely egotistical man. So this young man, by peering at his own reflection of the mirror, starts to feel this evil, egotistical fellow's presence coming through it. The 4th vignette is kind of a comic interlude.
There we go.
Yeah, once again, we have the mix of throwing some comedy in with a horror. This one really kind of stands out as an especially comic, almost vaudevillian kind of segment, because it involves two characters who are these British lads obsessed with golf, who are played by Basil Redford and Naunton Wayne, who played essentially the same characters in Alfred Hitchcock's movie The Lady Vanishes from 1938. Those two characters were so popular in that movie that these two actors ended up basically reprising the same role, though often under different names, in a series of other British comedies. So here they return to play their kind of comic act, which would have been very familiar to audiences at the time. And this is just sort of a silly interlude. Even at the end of it, the person who's telling the story is kind of like, by the way, that never happened. I was just telling a silly story. Then we get back to the real movie. And then we get to our fifth segment, which is the one that the movie is most famous for.
Yep.
This is the evil ventriloquist dummy segment. Really cool. So this involves a ventriloquist played by Michael Redgrave, who's in a sort of abusive relationship with his dummy, played by U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. And it's genuinely creepy, this segment. I really like it. The dummy is kind of belittling and undermining the ventriloquist at every turn, and kind of driving him to distraction, though the ventriloquist is most frightened of the prospect that the dummy's going to leave him for another ventriloquist. So the dummy seems to have a mind of his own, and it's hard to tell to what point it's the ventriloquist who's losing his mind, or if there is perhaps something supernatural going on. The twist ending at the end of the ventriloquist vignette, I love. It gives me fucking chills. It creeps me the fuck out. Really, really great twist ending to that. Then after that fifth vignette, we return to the sort of stodgy dinner party atmosphere, and we reach the conclusion of what's actually happening with the character Craig, who feels as if he's wandering into a dream. The way that it ends, I love. It really sticks with me. It's a really strong ending. I think it's not a strong ending because it's totally out of left field or because it's totally spectacular. It's a strong ending because it has this kind of hauntingly familiar feeling that dreams have. It has that dream logic that feels weirdly somehow relatable, and it's a fucking creepy, haunting ending. Not going to say what it is, but it's really great, and it really sticks with you. And I think it had a big impact on audiences at the time. A fun little tidbit is that the astronomer Fred Hoyle, after seeing this movie, it was his inspiration for creating his steady state model of the universe, which is a model for how the universe could be completely unchanging throughout time. It gives me chills. It really creeps me out. I think about this one all the time. It's a very British movie. You know, the dinner party scenes are super stodgy and British. There's a character at one point who says, "Jolly unpleasant when he comes slap up against the supernatural." But it's actually very rare to have a British horror film from that period. Apparently, horror films were banned during the war. This movie would have come out like just after the war ended. I guess maybe it was bad for morale or something, but it was really rare to have British horror films at that time. Have you guys seen this?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was pretty bored throughout most of it, just to be honest.
It's definitely like very stagey.
Like, there's a reason why everyone only remembers Hugo. It's because the rest of the stories just don't... They're not exciting.
Yeah, the first two I feel are just kind of your basic short stories that you could find in like any short story anthology anywhere in the world. The Mirror, I think, it gets a little more interesting. And then once you get to the ventriloquist one, you're getting into the real shit.
Just a creepy, creepy doll.
Super creepy.
Like, it looked like he had real hair on it. That was the creepiest thing that I keep on going back to when I picture this doll. Like, it looks like it has human hair. And yeah, and it makes you think, like, you're in that spot where you're like, is it the doll talking, or is it the ventriloquist just that good?
Mm-hmm.
For parts of it, anyway.
Or that crazy.
Yeah, or that crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. I love that that one story on that one.
Yeah, that one, it's hit a high watermark pretty early on. Not, that it came out at this type of time. Like, you weren't expecting this kind of cinema at this period in the 40s where, the world was, like, the only chilling reminders we wanted of life were in the newsreels that they were getting.
Mm-hmm. What do you got, Sheldon?
All right, next I'm going to go with just in order of their release. I got Body Bags next, 1993. Mm-hmm. This is John Carpenter's movie. Have you guys seen this one?
Yep.
Dylan? Yeah. So this one basically has, same with Creepshow, like everything you would want in an anthology. So the framing device in this one is better than any other one, I thought. John Carpenter stars in the intro, the framing device, as a coroner with body bags everywhere. And for each story, he unzips one of the body bags and then explains how he became what they're looking at. So from there, we go into the first little story, which is the gas station. This one is John Carpenter's, and this is just basically like just a fun little slasher. Starts off with the woman showing up for her first day at work at a gas station for an overnight shift. And as she shows up to work, there was a radio. Was she listening to the radio or watching TV? Either way, it says there was an escaped mental patient from Haddonfield. Haddonfield obviously being from Halloween. And then from there, we get customer after customer coming in. And I think we're left guessing on whether each one is going to be the psychopath. And this one has a couple of cameos. Wes Craven pops in. We see Sam Raimi's picture frame a couple of times. This one seems like it could be like an early John Carpenter slasher flick before Halloween as like a college little short, you know?
It almost seemed like John Carpenter doing a tribute to John Carpenter.
And then from that, we move into the next one, which is, I guess, my favorite. It's hard because the gas station was so good. This one is called Hair, another John Carpenter one. This one just makes me laugh just thinking of it. This one stars Stacy Keach, I think is how you pronounce his last name.
Yep.
Just fucking goofy as hell. That's what this one is. So this one is about Stacy Keach, the character. He's losing his hair. He's noticing he's balding. I relate to this one very much.
Yeah, I could feel that a little bit.
Oh god, I love this one. His girlfriend or wife, I'm not sure if they say or not, he's feeling like that maybe she doesn't think highly of him because he's losing his hair. He's like trying all these different methods to like regrow or make it thicker, or at one point he goes to his hairstylist and he gets this comb over that goes from fucking his left ear right to like almost his right ear, but his right ear side goes even further over top of that one. It's like the greatest comb over ever. Yeah, see, that's what I aspire to be. That I want that. Like when I go to my hairdresser, I show them that picture, and they're like, "Sir, you haven't lost enough hair yet." Like, all right, I'll be back next year. So he sees an infomercial about a hair growth thing, and he calls and then goes to this appointment. And then from there, we get his hair continuously grows and grows. And it's growing all over his body. His face is coming from his mouth. It
gets worse from there.
We get some bad CGI, which I actually kind of liked in this one. Just from the whole style of this one, that shitty CGI kind of worked. And then from there, we get to a more serious one. Probably the most serious of the three. The Eye, starring Mark Hamill. Probably in his best acting performance ever. Better than those, I don't know, whatever he's in Star Trek, Star Wars things.
Yeah, he I think he plays Larry Starboy in Starcrossers or something like that.
Night Stalk. No.
Oh,
yeah, you're right.
you guys are just being silly. You know it's Battlestar Galactica.
That's the one.
Stop dancing around it.
We're getting off topic. This one is produced by Toby Hooper. Mark Hamill is a baseball player. He gets in a car accident and loses his eye. A specialist comes in and they surgically implant a donor eye into him, who we later find out was from a serial killer. And he starts getting images and kind of becoming this serial killer through that eye.
It's interesting that years later, The Simpsons, during one of their Halloween specials, would kind of do a mix parody of both hair and eye by having Homer getting a hair transplant that is of a former criminal, and he starts turning into that criminal. In that one, we have a bit of a Blues Brothers reunion of Charles Napier, who played the lead singer of the Good Old Boys in the Blues Brothers, he's the coach, or the manager of the baseball team, and then also a wonderful voice on The Critic, an underappreciated show. And then Twiggy, the supermodel, before there was even supermodels, played his wife, including a very, unnerving and oddly graphic scene where he's basically attacking her, like when he's assaulting her.
Oh, did you slow down and pause it when you kind of see his dick? I did, and I went in slow-mo.
I mean,
there's like
six times, but not like an insane amount.
There's like a weird like sack over his dick.
Probably.
To protect.
So you don't actually see his lightsaber.
No, no.
Well, you do see the dark side, though. Oh boy.
Okay. Oh my
boy.
God! I'll take a drink.
My favorite part is John Carpenter as the coroner.
Yeah, the intro and outro. He's so good.
He's surprisingly good. Who knew he had those chops? Like, obviously he's being super cheesy, but that's the point, right? There's this great tradition in a lot of these anthology
like they know what they
TV
are.
shows and movies of having them narrated by a crypt keeper type character of some creepy person who just tells a lot of bad puns and just a creepy ghoul who makes you groan more than he makes you gasp in terror. And I love that tradition. It's fun, it's silly, and John Carpenter just goes hard for that and is surprisingly good.
Yeah, he's really into it, you can tell. It makes me wish that the TV series that it was supposed to be actually took off. It's a shame that we only have the movie, because they were obviously going for a Tales from the Crypt type vibe, like having noticeable like the actors in it. Or there's a lot of familiars, a lot of cameos. Like Tales from the Crypt dragged in like surprising A-listers into it all the time, and I think Body Bags was kind of aiming to be that type of thing, and I really wish it was. I'd love to be in that what if universe of.
If you watch the Tales from the Dark Side, there's also a lot of high-end actors in that as well.
Yeah, it's funny how some of those series really got some proper talent. I think it's just I think it speaks a lot to how these projects tended to be. There was a lot of passion projects involved in this, because you get so many different directors, so you get a lot of different people who have a lot of different friends in the biz, and they get to bring in all their pals, and so you get a really interesting roster, a really eclectic roster of people involved, because you have so many different writers pulling favors, you got so many different directors pulling favors, you've got just friends of friends, like all these.
Honestly, I didn't love this one too much.
For fuck's sake.
Okay, I'm going to say, I think it maybe came close to committing a cardinal sin of an anthology film by having two episodes that are too similar to one another. I think that the hair episode and the eyeball episode are structured too similarly. They're both like experimental procedure that goes horribly wrong.
Is it going to me now?
I think so.
Dylan put me in a bad mood.
That's fine.
I'm sorry.
We're gonna have.
I liked it too much.
I just didn't love it.
Well, it's funny because actually it makes for an interesting segue. You talked about how that Body Bags had your favorite type of overarching device of the Body Bags. Well,
I know where we're going.
Yeah, Tales from the Hood, very similar. Reflective, where we are overarching framing story is in the mortuary, and we visit each body. Although Body Bags, of course, was way more grisly and humorous about it. Like, one of them was just in a Ziploc bag because he was hit by a train after being dragged by a car. So, different levels, but still tinges of humor. But yeah, from 1995, 2 years after, I suppose, of that release, we got another horror comedy. And a dramatic anthology, too. It's, Tales from the Hood. Very relevant today, sadly. Some of these stories, like revisiting them, could have been put out last week, and they'd be just as relevant as they were in the 90s and the 80s and any decade before it. First one, we got Rogue Cop Revelation. We have a young black police officer observing just how corrupted the other officers are on the force, having to witness terrible things being conducted, including an activist getting just brutalized by these people. And of course he can't, because of this whole like unspoken code, or it probably is a spoken code, but still this code amongst the cops to not snitch on each other when they do these horrible, horrible racist things. And then from there we get this revenge tale of, things coming from beyond the grave, this version of this dead politician coming back and some sort of supernatural force either seeming as a zombified character or just like a poltergeist kind of creature or whatever he is, just doing different things to horribly get revenge. And the next one, Boys Do Get Bruised. Very interesting story of a young kid who's been showing up at school with different injuries and blaming it on a monster that he draws pictures of. And we start to learn that there might be something else happening in the household and revealing who or what the monster is. And like with big evidence being provided by a surprisingly grim and effective performance by David Alan Grier, who is a very jovial, hilarious man, but he is very much not in this short. He is clearly just a toxic, terrible person. Then the next one, we have many stories in here. The next would be KKK Comeuppance, where we get this, a former member of the Ku Klux Klan is running for governor in the South, because that's a thing that totally can happen in the USA, and that is not much of an exaggeration. Sadly, he's moved into this former plantation, and during his campaign, there's this hinting of something going on with this mural that is there depicting someone formerly of the plantation and these dolls that she would create. And then from there, it turns into this really interesting, entertaining, like stop motion kind of monster story. It makes for some very, very, very interesting scenes and a really interesting ending. After that, we have Hardcore Convert, which is not that any of them, like all the in-between stories, there's a little bit of a bounce and a certain jovialness thanks to the performance of like the storyteller. I can't remember the character's name, but Clarence Williams III plays him wonderfully. He's just this
so great,
very instantly. He can be as broad and campy in his delivery of any lines, and it's just charismatic. You're absorbed. You just want him to just describe anything. He could just wander that place and describe the railings and the curtains for 90 minutes, and you'd be enthralled. You'd be like, this guy he really knows how to spin a yarn. This is great. This is fantastic. Read a menu to me. I don't care. It's just great. So it's interesting to bounce from. It's not that it's ever fully outside of the street level seriousness and things that they wanted to depict about, civil rights and what's happening in the American Black community, because it's all being told to a trio of drug dealers in South Central Los Angeles, which especially in the mid 90s, that was very much the like gangsta image du jour. Like this was, we're right at the height of, gangstrap was fully in its stride in popular music. Like all the artists and could not be more popular at that time. So you have to put yourself...
And even in movies, you would have had like Boys in the Hood would have come out recently.
Exactly. This was very much like, this was on the frontal lobe. And I remember when it first came out thinking how this was, what's happening here? It's got certain images that remind me of all those other things, like you say, Boys of the Hood, Blood In, Blood Out, like all these really great and interesting, and all the Spike Lee was an executive producer on this, so he knew exactly what he was trying to help get funded. And so yeah, we come back around to Hardcore Convert has this a gangster who is just, he's a full-on, essentially a psycho. Well, he is a psychopath he's killed a lot. It's the most extreme version and the most negative depiction of what's the most popular right at that time. He's like caught, he's sent to prison, but then they put him through this experimental program to try and, twist his brain back around and throwing all these images at him and these very jarring, unnerving, unsettling. It's just an unhappy film segment through and through. There's no haha neat bit to it. You're just watching all these horrible things being done by all the characters, and then they're just being inundated with all these images, and because we are too. So we're seeing all these images of lynchings and gang violence and just horrible things, and almost to our relief, we're finally like back to the mortuary to end it, where we get the whole twist. They pull off one more big twist, featuring the biggest use of practical effects and a little bit of computer effects at the end there to show just what's going on. But yeah, that's the entirety of it. And to go right into the favorite, yeah, Boys Do Get Bruised gets my favorite nod almost solely because in that they had this one device used in it that always I found very effective, just to me. I don't know how it is to others, but the way that the kid would draw the monster just set my imagination aflare. I always found that so much more scary, and that was something that a lot of filmmakers forgot for a while. There was always this, when you show just a quick image or a drawing, you get far more scared about imagining what could have happened or what it could be. Like thinking of everything from Silence of the Lambs. You see aftermath photos, but you don't know what he did. You just see the result of what he did, and it made you sickened and horrified. Or even like the X-Files used it to great effect. They had that one episode where there was a force, some sort of phantasmal force was attacking people, and it manifested as their greatest fears. And so they kept getting police descriptions of attackers, and each one was described as something different. One was described as Freddy Krueger, another was one became a disease, another was a monster that had wasp stingers for a mouth. Like you never saw it because it was this invisible force until it was in the room with you, and then it just became what you feared at that time. And that one, it was scaring the hell out of me because I kept anticipating seeing something. And same with this one, Boys Do Get Bruised. You get this sense like you see these horrible scribble drawings, and that's the beauty of it being a child's drawing, is it's not like there's detailed H.R. Giger type drawing where he's like, oh, I know exactly what I'm about to see come around the corner. You don't know. What is this child seeing? And you never fully do. And I thought that's really great. And also the ending of it managed to be like the final bit of comeuppance against Evan Allen Greer is both horrifying and also quite funny in its own way.
Yeah, so I just recently rewatched this. I didn't find it as enjoyable as I did when I was a kid, when I didn't really understand. I mean, I do like it. I just had a weird feeling watching it now than I did remembering it as a child. When none of that shit mattered to me, just because I didn't know that shit was happening.
Yeah, it's when the real horror comes through. You realize like some of this is not some silly. It's not like you can watch Creepshow and think like, my God, Leslie Nielsen might bury me at a beach. Whereas,
I mean,
well, not no more.
I guess my favorite one was the one with the dolls. I liked a lot.
Yep.
It had a Puppet Master feel, and I like those movies.
I'll just say I never watched this movie before until this week, and I watched it because will you let me know that you're going to include it? I was aware of it. I remember seeing I can picture the VHS. I remember seeing it on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of always assumed it would be like a Wayans Brothers kind of thing. Like getting high and making parodies. It is not that. This movie goes hard. And you know what? I fucking loved it. Like, it goes straight into these issues and confronts them head on. The opening title sequence I really like, right? Which is kind of similar to a lot of these opening title sequences you have in like present day prestige TV shows, where like as the credits are rolling, you get little glimpses of close-ups of some reverent object or something, and then when we finally see what it is, it's not like a castle or a crown. It's what it is it's a skeleton smoking a blunt, pointing a Glock at you. Objectively, one of the coolest images you can have. So, right there, obviously, we know the elements we're getting. We're going to get a spooky movie. There's going to be smoking weed, and there's going to be hood shit. But the whole opening title sequence is not played for laughs. It's got like a Christopher Young soundtrack. He did the Hellraiser music. It's operatic. It's intense. So right away, it's like, yeah, this is going to be the Hood Creepshow movie. And guess what? We're taking it fucking seriously.
Yeah.
And they take it fucking seriously. The episodes in this, we're grappling head on, no holds barred, no shirking with, in order, police brutality, domestic violence, institutional political racism in the United States, and then gang violence. It's hitting these issues directly, thoughtfully, intensely. With the first vignette, which is obviously about police brutality, Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday literally plays on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
This isn't subtle.
Yeah.
But some subject matter should not be subtle. And it confronts it so directly and so hard. And then when you finally get to the last vignette, which, as you mentioned, you've got this intense montage, which you already said is so intense you are begging for it to be over, just as the character who you're identifying with is begging it to be over, with images of Birth of a Nation and real life lynchings and stuff happening. And then you have this crazy strobe effect, which I can't imagine seeing that in theaters. I would have had a seizure if I saw that in theaters. There's moments where, there's real operatic movements, literal opera playing on the soundtrack. This movie goes hard. It's unsparing, and I was impressed. I did not expect that.
Yeah, really solid. It's kind of unfortunate that the much belated sequels don't quite have the punch, despite still being so relevant. They're still can be fine. They're not. They do bring in some fantastic cast, some fantastic actors into it, but yeah, this first one hits so many markers, as you said, like the whole order of things that it touches on. You want to blink so hard, but it doesn't blink for you. All right, we're on to the next batch then.
All right, yeah, so I guess I'm going to circle back to the third film I've picked. So I'm going to head over to Europe in 1968. A pretty good time and place to be, I think. European cinema in the late 60s fucking rules. We have the best French filmmakers of all time and the best Italian filmmakers of all time making their best movies. There was a number of omnibus, as they called them then, or anthology movies that were being made in Europe at the time, which is a great idea because there's so many brilliant filmmakers working. So I think this movie has one foot in the tradition of horror anthologies, but also maybe has a more significant foot in just omnibus European auteur movies of the 60s as well. So I'm talking about Spirits of the Dead from 1968. It's been released under a number of different titles. It's also known as Tales of Mystery and Imagination. It's also known as Extraordinary Stories. It's also known as Three Steps into Delirium. That might be my favorite of the alternate titles.
Me too.
Yeah, basically the idea of Spirits of the Dead is to take three great European art house filmmakers who were big at the time, the late 60s, and to have them each adapt a story by Edgar Allan Poe. So these aren't filmmakers that are really horror filmmakers at all. They're just really good filmmakers from the period who were asked to each do a Poe story. So the three filmmakers we have, Roger Vadim, Louis Malle, and Federico Fellini. Things start off with Metzengerstein, which is directed by Roger Vadim. Vadim would have been most known at the time for And God Created Woman, Barbarella as well. Vadim never met a moral he didn't want to flout. Like, this guy just loved pissing on any kind of bourgeois morality that he could. He was kind of this like Marquis de Sade figure in French cinema at the time. So it's great that he gets to start off here. So he's adapting somewhat faithfully a story. He gender swaps it. In the original story by Poe, it's about the Count Frederick who develops a fixation on a young baroness. In his version, it's the Countess Frederica of Metzengerstein, who is played by Jane Fonda, who was actually Vadim's wife at the time, who becomes somewhat enchanted by a young baron, who in this movie is played by Peter Fonda, Jane's brother. Naturally, because again, this is Vadim, and if he sees any opportunity at all to piss off moral censors, he's going to do that. I really like this film. The real star of this movie is neither Fonda. The real star is the costumes. The costumes are out of this fucking world. Incredible costumes. I think Jean-Andre was the production designer who I suppose was responsible for that. They're insane costumes that don't give a fuck about realism or anything. It's in some vague medieval setting. It's really debauched. The idea is to have this kind of Marquis de Sade world where the Countess of Metzengerstein is just living a completely amoral, debauched existence, having orgies and shit in her castle, hanging out with her pet cheetah. Really like the pet cheetah. I really like when, like, in these European surreal films, they often just have random animals hanging around in the background. It's beautifully shot. It was the cinematographer was Claude Renoir. There's a lot of cool zooms. The interiors in the castle are just full of luscious colors and candle lighting. The exteriors have gorgeous nature. It was shot in Brittany in northern France. And it looks amazing. Jane Fonda looks amazing. So the storyline, we've got she's living the kind of lifestyle, the Sadian lifestyle, where she can satisfy any whim she has. But when she meets this Baron, who's a distant relation of hers, he wants nothing to do with this lifestyle and yet seems mysteriously happy, which bothers her. And she tries to invite him over for a party. He doesn't want to come because he's perfectly happy where he is, living his own reclusive lifestyle. This irks her. To get revenge on him for the snub, she orders his stables, including his beloved horses, to be burned. He ends up dying in the fire, but then a mysterious horse comes and visits her. The horse may perhaps contain his soul, or perhaps it may just contain some idea of inaccessible happiness that he represents that has come back to haunt her. So she develops a strange obsession with this horse. There's also kind of avant-garde music that happens in this, which works really well with the gorgeous photography. It's a classic Poe story in that it has kind of weird parable that's hard to unlock. And with this gorgeous movie, it's like this beautiful jeweled box that contains some sort of meaning that you can't quite get at, but you're not even sure you want to get at it because just having the box is beautiful enough. After Metzengerstein, we move our way to the second episode of Spirits of the Dead, which is William Wilson. This is directed by Louis Malle. So Louis Malle was a big French filmmaker at the time. He did The Fire Within, Elevator to the Gallows. All of these movies, one thing that ties them together, each short has a main character who's kind of a privileged, entitled, egotistical jackass. That's one thing they all have in common, but none of them are as much of a jackass as the hero of William Wilson, who's just a complete fucking asshole. He's played by Alain Delon, who was a huge French film star at the time, and he has this real icy coolness about him, which works so well with the character, who is a complete fucking monster. This is a doppelganger story. It has Alain Delon's character, William Wilson, who is an officer in the Austrian army in their invasion of northern Italy for much of the movie. As he does or tries to do terrible things to other people, he ends up getting intercepted by another person who looks just like him, who says that his name is also William Wilson, and he ends up getting driven to madness by this other person who's haunting him. Brigitte Bardot is also in this movie, who was another huge French film star at the time, though she's kind of miscast in this role. Louis Malle makes her wear this big, ugly, heavy black wig as if he wants people to somehow not notice that it's Brigitte Bardot. Not really sure about that. This is the weakest of the three, but it's still a good movie. Then we move on to the third part, which is The Crown Jewel. Toby Dammit, directed by Federico Fellini. So the first two are by French filmmakers. Fellini is, of course, the god of Italian filmmakers. Here he makes an insane hallucinatory phantasmagoria, which is extremely loosely based on a Poe story. It's apparently based on the Poe story Never Bet the Devil Your Head, which is a weird kind of comic story that Poe wrote at one point to make fun of transcendentalists. It almost has nothing to do with it. I think Fellini at one point after this movie said that he had never read a Poe story in his life. He might have been joking, but he might not have been, because this has nothing to do with anything Poe wrote, which is fine. It's great.
It has like a similar-ish ending, but barely.
So this takes place in the present day, or in the present day of the 60s, and it's a super 60s movie. Toby Dammit is a English actor played by Terence Stamp. He's in Rome. He's arrived to shoot a movie or something. They've promised him a Ferrari, which is the only thing he cares about, and he has to do some publicity tour where he has to appear on an awards show like the Italian Oscars. He's drunk and probably really stoned out of his mind throughout the whole thing. So it's him in this sort of downward spiral of addiction and alcoholism and having a hard time seeing the world around him as meaningful or real. It's shot in almost nauseatingly intense color. A lot of the background characters are just like cardboard cutouts or people wearing masks or like people dressed up as Sgt. Pepper's era Beatles in this extremely hallucinatory LSD drenched world that he lives in. And Toby might be going mad, and he has visions of this young woman who's bouncing a ball, who he says at one point he believes is the devil that is after him. So as we have in the other movies, again, a through line between them, we have this kind of egotistical character who's haunted by some figure that represents guilt or remorse or a dread of something about the way they've been living or their past catching up to them. And when he ends up finally going out and driving through the streets of Rome in his Ferrari, you feel as he feels that he's not going to escape this creepy girl with her ball, this devil figure. The movie is pure Fellini. It's puerile. It has a leering camera, but in kind of mirthful adolescent way. And then the camera goes off swirling in mad vortices. It's equally queasy and unsettling, and also just super rapt and overexcited. At this point in Fellini's career, he hadn't made a movie in a couple of years. He had just come off the huge successes of La Dolce Vita and 8.5, which were kind of the twin peaks of his career. After that, he made Juliet and the Spirits. And this is really a kind of a hinge moment in his career where he was starting to abandon completely whatever last vestiges of neorealism there still were in his earlier black and white movies and moving towards straight on phantasmagoria. It's beautiful from start to finish. I've met people who are big Fellini fans who didn't even know this movie existed. So
they're the lucky ones. Explain to me how this is a horror movie at all. There's nothing about this was horror. Nothing.
Well, they're based on Poe stories. So
yeah, so they dug fucking deep to find these shit stories, eh?
Yeah, we're not in the realm of the Telltale Heart here. We're in the deep cuts at this point.
This doesn't deserve to be on this list at all to be even talked about. It's barely fucking cinema to begin with. It looked like it was filmed using a fucking potato.
The colors are amazing in every one of these.
If you like the potato color, yeah.
I love the potato colors.
This was the worst movie experience I've ever had.
You just saw Congo 2 weeks ago.
Will, do you like this movie? Anything about it?
It could ride on the Mortal Kombat-esque costumes in the first segment alone.
I can't believe you're treating fucking Fellini the same way you treated bats.
Fuck Fellini.
All right, give me something. What do you got?
Do you hear that rumbling in the distance is several film professors tripping over themselves with rebuttals?
I'm going to say we should probably skip to Will while I gather myself.
I'll gladly do mine.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, to keep you contented, we're going to go right into a period you appreciate, 1963.
Oh, here we go.
With another European director, Mario Bava. With the film whose name resonates for many reasons, Black Sabbath. It had a few versions come out. The one I'm basically referring to would be the original Italian release.
Good, because the AIP American release was an absolute hack job.
But yeah, so we get the first story. It's one that doesn't have an anchoring framework story. The first one, simple enough. It's a call girl receiving several calls, and it becomes increasingly unnerving. You become increasingly concerned. You don't know exactly where it's going to be going. Decently simply shot, not unlike the cockroach segment in Creepshow, where we just get the one single setting, except the aesthetics are like the exact opposite. Whereas here, everything is, has linens and is pretty. But yeah, it's racking on the character's nerves as it's racking on your own, as you not sure where it's going to be going. Well, I guess we do have, it does have the framework. It has the introduction by Boris Karloff. Mm-hmm. Like, he is introducing it. It just doesn't have like a story. I mean, like, that's framing it all together. It's not like I work here at I don't know where whatever it would be. I'm an evil baker, and inside is a bread and a loaf of various horrors. And here's donuts of terror by way of France. Ugh, I needed a paycheck. But it has a really interesting point of, like, we have had the filmmakers appear in some of these anthologies, but to have the narrator step in to a role in the second one, the Warjalak, about some sort of vampiric, demonic type of ghoul that either one of the people that you see are one of them, or did they encounter them? What is it going to be? Kind of a Wendigo kind of story, it seems, for those that are more into the Canadian tradition of these stories instead of Russian, which the Warjalak would be from. Yeah, we have like a beheaded corpse right off the bat, and you get Karloff stepping out of the narrator position and coming in to play one of the crucial components in this story of the Warjalak. I don't know, it kind of reminded me of like more like stage vaudevillian, where someone could be addressing the audience directly and then step aside and like, and now I'm going to play this character, and they step over to a different part of the stage and take over that, and had that real vibe of it where Karloff just steps into it and you don't question it. You don't think, well, what the hell's the narrator doing? It doesn't take you out of it. You're still curious. And then it ends with the drop of water, which is probably, despite not having the biggest star in it, probably the most memorable segment. Bodies being prepared. There's the people dressing it see this ring on the finger, and then it becomes this whole, mystery like of theft and supernatural elements, and just very unforgettable visuals of the body and it's an expression on it, echoed later in other films, kind of getting like that, like the sickly sister in Pet Sematary, or you get this sense that they're dead, but they're very much a living presence in the entire story, figuratively and sort of literally. Like it kind of plays on what it could possibly be. That is that film, which partly chosen because it's a very interesting one, great 60s aesthetics to it, really wonderfully crafted. Like Bava is always interesting. He can't not be interesting. And it was the inspiration. It was literally the reason Black Sabbath, the band, got their name.
Yeah, I enjoyed the what's it called, drop of water.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of stuck with me too. That the weird face on the corpse thing there.
Yeah, it's hard to, you can't forget it.
Yeah.
One thing I find fun about this, old European horror movies often would try to establish their pedigree by declaring which famous writers' stories they were adapting. So Black Sabbath announces at the start that it's based on stories by Anton Chekhov, Leo Tolstoy, and Guy de Maupassant. All of that is bullshit. They made up these stories that is not based on those writers' stories. Well, actually, the Vordelok is loosely based on a story by Alexei Tolstoy, who is not the same person as Leo Tolstoy.
Yeah.
and the Drop of Water by Anton Chekhov that they claim their credits is not a real story that exists. So I really enjoyed that.
I found that really funny. That was seeing those names, I was instantly in doubt. They
have to do that with Poe too. They'll just claim based on Poe without being clear on which Poe story.
Yeah.
In a lot of these movies, I really love Black Sabbath. I think it's an incredible movie. I'm a big fan of Mario Bava.
Yeah, me too.
I love what he does with his visuals. Like, he often worked in pretty low budget, fast paced environments, and you can tell, but he does a lot with what he has. Like with the camera movements, with the colors and the lighting. To be fair, you have to have a high tolerance for colored lights. There's a lot of colored lights in his movies, but I love it. I love the colors. I love the movements. I love the tension he builds in the first episode, the telephone one. Just one set, one scene. And just mostly with camera movements, he builds so much tension. And in A Drop of Water, when he takes a huge advantage of the interiors where they shoot in, the house where the woman died in, which has these huge ceilings and these weird greenish colors in the walls, he films it in a way that you're so aware of the space, of the kind of creepy, cavernous aspect of it. He does great stuff. I think Mario Bava is an incredible filmmaker. And, he was one of the guys who made the Giallo movies happen. He made the first couple movies that kind of kickstarted that. He also had his fingers in so many other genres too. He made like good Hercules movies, good spaghetti westerns. He made the ultimate pop art Euro spy movie, Danger Diabolique. Oh. Yeah, it was just great. I love that movie.
It's such a beautiful movie.
Yeah, he did so much great stuff with that kind of pop art vibe, and I think Black Sabbath is definitely in the top tier of his work. I think it's a great showcase for what he's able to do, And I really like Boris Karloff's bookends. And I love that little sleight of hand at the end where you're kind of like,
Oh my god. So I was waiting for you to finish so I can talk about that.
Yeah.
It is amazing. That's the one thing that stuck with me about this movie was the ending.
It's funny. It's so funny. It's a fake horse, whatever. And they just lead into it, and then finally they pan back.
I loved it.
Yeah, these transitions between like reality, illusion, delusion are really a part of Bava's catalog of what he's doing and what he's doing throughout the movie. He's really toying with that. He's having fun with that. And I really enjoy that. There's a good sense of fun in this. I think it's a wonderful anthology film.
The ending of that scene was my favorite part of the movie.
It both caps it off and undermines everything that came before.
Mm-hmm. I guess, anyways, my favorite part of that one was, I guess the last one. I think I already said that.
I might go with the Vordeluk in the middle as my favorite. I like the kind of family horror, the way that the characters are terrified of their own family members killing them, and yet are incapable of turning them away, are incapable of breaking these ties. I like that kind of Catholic Italian idea of being tied to your family in such a fatal way. So have you gathered your thoughts, Sheldon? Have you recollected yourself?
Barely, but I'm hanging in there.
Okay.
Stay
strong.
I've been slowly building up to this one with, I got a 1980s movie, a 1990s movie, now I'm into the 2000s. And this one is my favorite horror anthology of all time. Okay, so we got 2007's Trick or Treat, directed by Michael Dougherty, Dog Harry, however the fuck you say his name.
Dog Harry, yeah.
You got it. There's a comic book themed one as well, just like Creepshow. Set on Halloween night, which makes it extra special for watching horror movies. And each of the 4 stories are on the same timeline, happening on the same night in the same location. They introduce a little Halloween character, a little Halloween gremlin called Sam. I'm assuming it's short for Sam Haim. If I'm guessing, I don't know. That was my guess.
Yeah.
Good guess.
Yeah, so all the little stories all come together. They all like mingle together. It's a little untraditional like your regular horror anthologies, where it's just story, next story. And during the comic book intro, there's like little tidbits of the 4 stories that we're going to see. And then like tidbits on like how to stay safe during Halloween, which ties in with Sam. Because Sam is only here to protect the rules of Halloween. So I guess I'll just go into the first kind of story about the principal. So as I said before, they all kind of mix together. Each one you'll see other characters coming and going. This one is like a serial killer type story. And it starts with some like little fat fuck kid tipping over pumpkins. And he goes to the principal's house and starts stealing his candy. The principal is now acknowledged as a serial killer, as burying kids in the backyard, etc. And then from there we go to the school bus massacre episode. This one is like an urban legend about some dude driving a school bus off a cliff filled with mentally handicapped children. And now we're in real time, and a couple kids all go to the same cliff where that happened to try and play a prank. And then the next episode we go to, I think this is the like most prevalent one of them all. Because this one we see a bunch of women who arrive to town on Halloween night, all trying to find dates to a party or like a bonfire they're having. And we see them in every single episode to this point. And then from that story we go to the story that actually involves Sam. Sam, being the little Halloween goblin, knocks on a door to some old man's house who has been scaring kids and stealing their candy and not giving out any candy, breaking all the Halloween rules.
Yeah, it's definitely different from the other ones we've talked about in the sense that the different storylines intertwine with one another. You're going in and out of different storylines. We revisit the same characters over and over.
Yeah, it's all just like a little slice of this all happens within a span of a short amount of time.
It's all one night, all Halloween night,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a tapestry of these different stories. There's the occasional little title card that'll say earlier or later, but otherwise we get little hints about whether something happens earlier in the evening or later in the evening, which is cool. It's a different format.
It could almost not be an anthology. It could almost be like, if this is an anthology, is Pulp Fiction also an anthology kind of thing? Like, is it...
I guess what made it an anthology for me was each little episode was had a different subject matter.
Mm.
But yeah, no, as I'm watching it for the second time, you can find little foreshadowing in each episode about the next episode coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nice little hints dropped throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they definitely put a lot of care and attention into lining up the timelines and making sure that there's little references and callbacks.
Yeah, I remember when I first saw it, I really, really, really wanted to be wowed, but I think I was really wanting to basically just watch Creepshow. Because I just love Creepshow so much, and so I'll admit that it at first didn't strike me as much as it should have, but I appreciate it more as time went.
And I think they created a nice new little Halloween monster, which
Yeah.
It pisses me off that we haven't got a sequel yet.
Which strand of it did you like best, Sheldon? Did you already say? I don't think so.
The main one was a surprise party with the women going to their bonfire.
Yeah, it's a fun
I thought
twist.
that was great. That was the main theme of the entire thing.
It's a fun twist. You have Anna Paquin playing the main character who's dressed as Little Red Riding Hood, and then when she's kind of being stalked by another character, you're like, oh, okay, I know why she's dressed as Little Red Riding Hood, because she's being stalked. Nope. There's a whole other twist that has to do with her costume coming later on.
I was a fan of just the very early on twist of expectations, where the principal is just sort of so domestic about carving the severed head, and just the... Because the actor does a great job. He's just really good at, he reads instantly as high school principal.
Yeah, it's Dylan Baker, who's a great character actor. Yeah. I really love what he's trying to dispose of the body. And the movie puts you totally on his side, even though he's the creepy motherfucker. But you're totally on his side while he's trying to bury the body, and the body's waking up, and he's fucking stomping on it.
Children,
and shit,
by the way. Children.
Yeah, I'm a small child stomping on a small child, trying to get it to fucking die. The dog starts barking at him, and then he cuts off a finger and throws the finger to the dog. Before we wrap up, what other movies would you have included? Say we had expanded the list to 4 or 5.
So originally I wanted to include Creepshow 2, but I thought that might be,
redundant.
Yeah.
There's some that I saw somewhat recently that were just a bit of fun. There was a few from the whole kind of Hammer era, The House That Dripped Blood is fun, but From Beyond the Grave is kind of overlooked. It's one where the Peter Cushing...
I wouldn't have minded including VHS. I kind of like it mostly because I really like the Joe Swanberg one, which all takes place within a video chat. I find that one really, really good. The other ones I think are okay too. I wouldn't have minded talking about that. I was kind of hoping somebody would bring up Trilogy of Terror.
Mm. Yeah, there's there's only one good one.
The doll one? Is that the good one?
That's the good one.
Yeah, the doll one's the best one. I wouldn't have minded Grindhouse too, honestly, because Planet Terror is probably my favorite Robert Rodriguez movie, and Death Proof is probably my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie. All right, well, we all learned something about ourselves. Okay, well, thanks, guys. Thanks again. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thanks, everyone out there.
Have a good night, everyone. Keep looking behind you.
What is that movie? Explain to me. What is that movie? It wasn't a horror movie.
We're big tent in this show. We everything that's horror adjacent or
great. Now I know. Now I know what I can add to the next. I'll pick some just fucking awful movie for you guys to watch. I just sit through that bullshit. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens.